Women on a Green Mission. Follow along as two friends document their unfurling permaculture journeys.
Join our chats each week where we'll be sharing how we and others apply permaculture to our gardens and daily life.
We're no experts. We're at the start of our journey, fumbling our way to a greener life. We love your company along the way.
This week we've got Anthea joining Jo and I to talk about localisation and World Localisation Day. Thanks for joining us, Anthea.
No worries. Glad to be here.
Before we get too far into recording a podcast, we always acknowledge where we're recording on. So where are you recording, Anthea?
We always used to say Wanneroo country here, although recently there's been some acknowledgement of the Warramai people as well.
Oh,
so,
lovely.
Yeah, I think being near the river, it's probably more of a communal area between
trade and everything.
Yeah.
Lovely. And what about you, Jo?
We're on Wanneroo country up here as well. So we're up near Brankston in the Hunter Valley. And I think we are just Wanneroo peoples, and I think there's maybe 5 different spellings of that. So probably pronunciations. I don't even know if I pronounced that correctly, but it's definitely my acknowledgement of the First Nations people here.
And I'm up in the lower Northern Rivers area on Yagle country.
Fantastic.
So, let's get into it. I guess the first place to start, Jo, would be what is localisation or World Localisation Day?
Oh, well, this is something, and this is full disclosure here. When we were looking at topics to discuss, and you, Alysse, mentioned World Localisation Day, and I went, oh, what's that? I didn't even know that's a thing, and I thought I just must have been living under a rock. But World Localisation Day was actually something that was only started, I think it was maybe last year or possibly even the year before. It's on June 21st, and it's been set up by a not-for-profit called Local Futures, which is founded by Helena Norberg Hodge. And essentially what, the crux of it is that the pandemic really highlighted the fragility of the global system and the need for really robust and resilient, local food and supply and support systems. So really bringing it back into that local element. So today we thought, well, what a great opportunity to have a chat with Anthea about not necessarily World Localisation Day, but really just localizing. What does that mean? What is the global system and what is a local system? So Anthea, I suppose I'd love to ask you, what does localization mean for you?
For me, I'd say it's about making any changes that you can, starting small as we usually do, just to try and think about how we can provide for ourselves within our local area, from our local community, support the people we live near and that we share this land with. One example that comes to mind, I think, for a lot of people is food. When we were teaching the kids at this local school here, and we did a bit of a talk of supply chains and how, one extreme example, but if you buy a tin of tomatoes that comes from Italy, instead of tomatoes that you can grow in your own garden, you can have up to, I think it was 27 steps, or maybe it was even a few more than that, in how the process to get it to your pantry, basically. So if we can minimize that is obviously good for us, good for the planet. Supports our local community as well. And it's funny because talking to the kids about it, as they often do, they just have the best answers and just think about it in the most logical way. And I said, but we can grow tomatoes here. Why would anyone get them from Italy? I said, I guess it's just, this localization day is about creating awareness about how we might not check the pack of food that we buy and see where it comes from and whether it's something we can source more locally.
So I think there's kind of two sides to it too. There's that environmental impact of food miles, obviously, and that the energy and time and effort it takes to get something to the shops here in Australia, especially because we are an island. But then the other side of it is the benefits of what being local, buying local, provides, like whether that's health wise, whether that's community wise, strengthening our community, keeping our money local. So I think that's kind of a twofold thing. Like, yes, the environmental side of it, but also the perks of why localization is important for our local economies and our local communities.
Yeah.
And our health, to eat better quality food because it's literally picked from your garden. Or, there's also that thought of, I can't grow it myself, but at least I can support my, local market. And, that's also grown locally, and that's better for your health than, buying something that's, probably picked before it's ripe and shipped around the country or the world.
Well, that's it. You're getting the better quality, aren't you? It's balancing both that earth care and people care, because it's covering both quite well. Yeah,
absolutely. And also, I suppose looking at then, looking big picture of globalization. Like in theory, and we were having this chat with Will earlier, like in school, we were always taught that, this globalization is going to be absolutely fantastic. It's going to connect us all, and we're going to be involved in, all aspects of all different countries and cultures and nations and trade and way of doing things. And it's going to give us access to things that we don't have access to here. But the reality of it is that you've got these big conglomerates, these multinational companies, and they're the ones that have got the monopoly. So they're the ones that drive everything. They drive, what we buy, how we behave in a consumer market.
Politics.
And politics, absolutely. So they're influencing, policy. They're influencing so many things, and it's not for the good of the people. Like, and anyone thinks that it is, and I'm going to say they're delusional, because it's not for the good of the people. It's for the good of the pockets of the shareholders, and those in power. No one at the top is sitting there thinking about the Joes, the Antheas, and the Alysses of the world, going, okay, what can I do that's going to support the environment? It's going to ensure that our planet is going to be here for generations to come, and it's also going to provide these women with what they need. I don't give a shit.
They're those big companies.
No, exactly, not the big companies, but locally, absolutely. People, if you've got a local business, so just take, like one of the big supermarket chains, for example, they'll put tins of tomatoes from Italy in there. But if you're buying your tomatoes from, Joe Blogs down the road, then you're getting, as you said, that fresher product. You're getting, food steps as opposed to food miles, food.
Yeah, that's right.
And he or her are growing the products that are going to be bought by locals. They're growing seasonal products. They're growing products that are endemic to the local area, that can grow in the local area. And they're, more often than not, I don't want to say everyone, but more often than not, they're doing it in a really viable way, which supports the environment and doesn't try and go against the environment. So there's so many different factors to it, isn't there?
Yeah, I also love the fact that it teaches you to eat seasonally, because I find it's hard, like, without spending hours Googling what grows when, if you're not growing it yourself, buying from the supermarket doesn't tell you what's in season at what time of year at all, because often you can just get things right through. Like grapes, for example, if they're not growing here, they just import them from California. So if you're buying grapes locally, you know that they must be in season.
I mean, you guys have a stall at the markets that you do. How do you guys find it, I guess, on the flip side of being people that sell? Do you find it viable economically for you, like that it's worth your while to actually be doing it? Because I think that's the hard thing too. Like, I think some people find it more expensive, and it's kind of balancing, do we put our money where our mouth is and spend a bit extra on, local spinach or whatever it is that you're buying, versus the cheaper version and the more convenient version. And I find that really sad that we can't support our local farmers and local produce, because, everyone's bottom, dollar is hurting at the moment. And, we're also aware of our money and where it's going, because the cost of living's so high and all those things. So from like that side of the coin, like, how do you guys find it?
We keep things pretty small anyway. So if we sell it from our front gate with pay as you feel, we often put suggested prices down, and they're often based on supermarket prices so that we can help our community by hopefully saving them money rather than them having to pay more for our produce. We don't have the overheads doing it that way of the fuel to get it places, the cost of running a market stall, anything else that might be involved in like a bigger setup like that. But it is hard that way in that sometimes you end up with more waste if there's produce left over at the end and it's more than you can consume. We always try and give it away first, but then we've got animals as well that we can feed it to, but it's you never kind of know how it's going to go. We find when we book a market store, we pretty much sell out of everything. But then you do have to travel to get there, and it's not as financially viable for us doing it that way at our scale. But not due to lack of interest, just due to what we currently grow and how many hours you have to be there and all that kind of thing. But we mostly just do that to connect with people. It's really fun talking to people about food and vegetables and growing and all the things that we do. I really enjoy it. I actually helped a friend recently on his market stall. He sells fruit trees, and I spent 2 days with him doing that. And I just had such a good time talking to people about like fruit trees and what they can grow and how to grow and almost like myth busting a little bit and things like that. And it was just, I don't know, it's great to connect with people over things like that. So the markets we do mostly because we enjoy it. But yeah, I can see how like if that was your main income, that would be really tricky, and you'd probably have to charge more than what we do. And it's hard to find that balance, I think, because you don't want people to be inaccessible to people. The whole point of growing, I think, for a lot of us is that you get to share that, and you're contributing to your local economy and helping your local community access fresh food.
Do you find that people are open to paying that a little bit more because it is something that is local, and it's something that they can actually come and have a chat to you, or have a chat to the vendor, the grower, the producer, and they know that they're getting a good quality product, and they may be buying less of that product, but because it's such a high quality, they don't need to buy so much. Do you find that's something that occurs?
Yeah, I think so. I think most people are, quite willing, especially when they meet you face to face and, you're creating that relationship. They're probably willing to pay more than they would going to get it from the supermarket, like a big supermarket. But at the same time, I don't want it to be inaccessible to people who maybe see the value in it but couldn't actually afford it, especially at the moment where a lot of families are living paycheck to paycheck at the moment. And if I can afford to sell it for a lower price, then I do. Just to make sure everyone who, and then even then, like when we do it out the front and it's pay as you feel stall, it's, if you couldn't afford it, you can just come and take it, or you can just pay what you do have, or whatever you feel.
I think that's so lovely, but it's just not the norm. You know what I mean? I think we need more of that, and more of understanding and putting our values, I think, at that higher priority. And look, it takes a lot of reconditioning. Like, can I sacrifice, I don't know, my Netflix subscription or something so that I can put my values first and spend that money on something that means more to me? Because it can be hard to break those habits, and I think it's so conditioned into us to want ease and cheapness over the effort it might take to go to the markets, and then maybe even have to go to the shops afterwards as well, because you can't get the cheese, or you can't get I don't know, some packet of chips that your kids like. Do you know what I mean?
Like, that's it. Or your favorite cereal, or
exactly.
Like even people who shop at like a smaller supermarket or like Aldi or something, I find that a lot of them then need to make the time to go and shop somewhere else as well, just because they don't have a particular product they need or prefer. And So then you've got to have that time to be able to do that, which is also tricky at the moment, because the less money people feel they have, or the harder it is to get by, the more time they spend trying to create more money by working a second job or doing what they need to do to make ends meet. So
I think part of this too is sort of reprioritizing and rationalizing for ourselves of, as you said, Alysse, before, what's important and what's our priority. And I love the concept, and we've discussed this before on different episodes, of enoughness, of that. And they talk about it on like, I first heard it on the Future Stating podcast around what's your enough. And I know for us, once we really sat with that and understood for ourselves and we have to keep redoing it, because, we get sucked in as well, and we need to now, all of a sudden have this and have that. And we go, well, actually, do we really need that? And now that we continue to reprioritize what is enough, it opens up different opportunities for us in the way we think about, getting our food in or getting our products in, that we need for our household or for ourselves. And like for me, recently I've reconfigured the spare room. I've got the old sewing machine out, which I bought, 20 something years ago. It's got a bit of a story to it, but I've never learned to sew on my sewing machine. And I went, well, you know what? Localization. I'm going to take the clothing that I already have, and I'm going to reconfigure that. And it doesn't get much more local than that. It's out of my own wardrobe. But I can then potentially swap items with different people, and keeping it again in the community. So just as an example of a way to do that.
Yeah, actually, on the World Localisation Day website, I noticed something in some of their ideas that they had on there that they called a time bank, where you can, it's, I think, probably like a digital concept where you log in time and kind of exchange it with other people in a bigger system. But you could certainly do it on a small scale, where even rather than, I mean, eventually maybe you'll be creating items that you can swap with other people's items, but even for now, maybe someone local could teach you how to sew while you teach them about composting or something else.
I like that.
So just that kind of a skill. I've also heard it called a skill swap, where you just kind of go hour for hour and just exchange that way.
Yeah, I love that. I've never actually thought about that before, but that's a really beautiful thing to be able to do.
I think trading in that alternate economy space comes into a lot with this, like whether it's, bartering, trading, swapping your, your labor for vegetables, whatever it might be. I think that's a really good place to start when it comes to thinking about how to keep things local, because, I can't trade my time necessarily with someone in Europe, so it's going to force me to be local, you know what I mean? So I think it's a really cool way to think about it, for sure.
I love the idea of even just thinking of babysitting or minding other people's kids as like a skill as well.
I did that.
It's super useful to all of us parents.
I exchanged it pre-kids. I was babysitting in exchange for personal training.
That's great. That's a really good example.
So I think the other part of it too is I was talking to someone down the road about it the other day. She had a word for it, and I can't remember what it is, but that concept of there only being 3 days worth of food available to us in the shops. It's like if the supply chain got cut tomorrow, there is literally only 3 days worth of food available in the big shops. So, beyond it being let's be green and let's eat healthy, it's also food security. Like, you might not be able to grow all your own food, but do you have a local supply of where you can get your food? Because that can be the reality. Like, we've lived through a pandemic. There's going to be things like, trade wars, or, when the internet gets shut down because some hacker's done something. You know what I mean? There's all these things are in our future, and everything is so computer and data based and at a press of a button, or completely automated in some respects, that if that supply chain gets disrupted, where can we find our food? Like, how are we going to survive? Can we actually, like, not doomsday thinking, but it could just be that, some software crashes, then what?
It could be a storm. It could be, like when you have 20 up to 27 steps to get something from A to B, that's 27 potential points of failure, really. It's
totally.
Like it could just be a storm while the ship's on the way over to Australia, or it could be an accident on the road where the truck's traveling, or there's so many points that it could be interrupted. And even when you are growing your own food, just by talking about it with other people means that if your tomatoes don't work out, then you'll know who else might have some.
Exactly.
So you've got redundancies in that as well.
It comes back to fair share in some way too, because Jo and I, when we did that episode talking about, giving with an open hand, like I might give someone seedlings today and not expect anything back, but that might mean in 4 months' time that I get unexpected basil delivery on my doorstep. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, not necessarily always wanting to exchange for money or time and just being generous with what you have. Like if you have something in abundance, then why hang on to it? Like you said, if you've got the produce at the end of the day and you can give it away, then do it. Like I think it does come in swings and roundabouts, and that will come back to you at some point. And
we certainly find that it does. I think the first point I was going to make is that when you give to someone, they often feel like they want to give back to you anyway, and it may be 6 months down the track and they have something they can offer, or it could be a direct exchange at the time. But even without that, I think just by I guess the hard part is that it's harder. I certainly found it at first harder to receive without feeling like I needed to give.
Yeah.
There's certainly been times where someone buys you a coffee because plenty of times I've left my wallet in the car or something, especially with a new baby. Very like baby brain, forgotten my card or lost something, and someone says, "Don't worry, I'll cover it this time." And then you often say, "Well, I'll owe you one next time." And it's that whole shift in thinking that person's probably not going to be expecting it anyway. Like if I don't get another opportunity to give that back to them, then they're probably going to be totally okay with that. And I'll be giving to other people in the future who are in the same situation. So it's it's good to have those direct exchanges, but it's also good to just have that free giving and free receiving as well, where you don't have to feel guilty when someone just offers you something that's an abundance for them or something that they can help you out with at the time. There's also, I heard a saying once, and I can't remember exactly how it went, but it was along the lines of when you ask someone for a favor, it often does more for them than it does for you, because they get that opportunity to be useful and to feel like they're important to you, and that you've got faith in them because you feel comfortable enough to ask them in the first place. And I thought, that's like a really good way to look at it too. Like, don't be afraid to ask, because it's probably something that they're quite happy about, to be included in what you're doing, especially like moving house and things. Like just saying, "Oh, could you give us a hand with lifting this piano," or something like that. It's often not too inconvenient for someone, but an opportunity for them to feel like they're helpful for you.
Yeah, we had a little nonna that used to live next door to us in Wollongong, and she'd constantly be throwing like basil and herbs and tomatoes and whatever over the front gate. But I think, and I felt like, oh my God, like I need to give Naomi something back. Like, how do I pay her back? And then I was having these other thoughts at the same time going, you know what? And not to like, oh, I'm so good, but like for her, that interaction was what she was craving. You know what I mean? And
she got something out of that.
Yeah, just because she didn't receive something physically back, it made her feel good. It made her feel useful. We'd have a 10-minute chat. We'd check in. Someone was there. Someone was with her. It gave her socialization. So depending on people's circumstances, the act of giving is giving someone something. It's just not tangible.
Yeah. Another place I find that people don't feel that there's a value in it is it often comes up with permaculture at the pub, where people say, "I don't have anything to offer," but some people really like to just talk. And I said, if you can just sit there and listen, that is something you are offering, because even if you don't want to talk or you don't feel like you have anything to contribute, like some people just love to tell their stories, and some people are storytellers and some people are listeners. So you're giving them something just by listening to them.
Just being there is enough. that's
Yeah.
often just enough. Like that, just showing
Yeah.
up. You don't have
That's
to do
right.
anything. There doesn't have to be a grand gesture, or there's no expectation of just, just being there. I mean, and we've all had that, experience if you're going through a hard time or something like that, just having a friend being there. You don't want to talk about it. You don't want to pull
Yeah.
it apart. You don't, just having someone there. And
Yeah.
sometimes, that's enough. I
Yeah,
wanted
that's
to,
right.
I suppose I wanted to go back, and this is a sort of a thought process that I was having, Alysse, on a conversation you and I had recently about supporting local, and about how we've only got 3 days left of food potentially left in the big chain. So the problem that we have, though, is that a lot of people don't realize that they actually need to support local and buy local now, so that those local producers continue to grow and they still have an income. It's still, it's still a viable process for them, and that the local, the local store holders and the market holders still show up week in, week out. And so it's really important that we do this on a very regular basis and on a very conscious level, and not just do it when, we can't get our our toilet paper because there's a pandemic, and then all of a sudden you want to, go and support local and buy Aussie made and all the rest of it. Like, it's, I jest at that because, we all know what we all went through, but it's really important that, you're doing this on a really conscious and consistent basis, and not just when the shit hits the fan. And really highlighting that for people as well, of just choose one thing. Just choose one thing, today, that you can buy local, that you can support locally, whether it's food, or a local, craft, or soap, or beer, or, whatever it is that you need in your life. What can you do that you can walk up the road, or, drive around the corner for 5 minutes and be able to go and get that locally?
Yeah, for sure. And um, like in services and things as well, there's a lot we can get online now as far as information, like doing workshops online, and face to face doesn't suit some people, especially like online things can help with people with busy work schedules and things like that. But if you can support someone local, and often there's other benefits to that, meeting other local people and things like that for yourself, but supporting people who are in your community with services they provide as well.
I think what you were saying too, Jo, like to do it now and not just when the shit hits the fan, that also comes back to like building relationships. Not that you want to be a doomsday prepper, but like when it does all happen, or when you need it the most, those connections are also the things that we rely on. You can't just call Woolies and be like, oh hey, listen, I really need lettuce this week, can you give it to me? Like when push comes to shove, it's your people and your community around you that are going to be there to hold you up, whether it's financially, or when you're in a pinch, or whether it's you might need something delivered that week, you can't go to the markets, and those things won't be possible if you don't already have that existing relationship. Like if someone called you up, Anthea, and said, oh, can you do a delivery, you'd be like, well, no. Like, but if they're there shopping with you every week, it might be something that you'd consider, or it's on your way home anyway, and you have that relationship with that person, so you don't mind doing it. So I think it's more than just supporting local, it's the relationship and the connection, and
definitely,
and those things that come with it.
An example I have of that is we had a market that we'd picked for, and normally the markets are first thing in the morning, but this was a Christmas market, and they wanted to tie the farmers market in with the craft market, I guess, and they had it in as like a twilight thing. And so we spent the afternoon picking, and then the weather turned and it got cancelled just as we were leaving. So we'd already picked everything. And so we put it out the front and put a post up publicly to say, just come and get it. Like, we don't want to see it go to waste. We've spent hours picking this, so please come and take some. But also people that we knew that shopped with us, we would just message them directly to make sure they knew about it. So because we already had that relationship with them, they were probably the first to find out about that as well. So when there was an abundance of food, we were just saying like, oh, you live near here and we know that you normally like to buy produce from us. Like, we've got some available at the moment that you can just come and have. Like, it was definitely beneficial for those people as well. But yeah, I think making small changes, one step at a time. I always like to pick the easiest thing first. It's almost like when you write a to-do list and you put something on there that you know you're about to do anyway, or you've just done, so you get the satisfaction of crossing it off.
Yeah,
If you pick something really achievable, you get that, like, those endorphins, I guess, where you then are really motivated to go and make the next change. And so that can be a good way to start as well, even if it's not fresh produce for you and it's just, like you said, someone who makes soap down the road or something, and you can just buy some soap from them and make one small change at a time.
Milkwood's new book, I don't know if either of you have flicked through it or read it or had the opportunity to look at it, but her new book is about habits, essentially. So she's broken it up into the 12 principles, and it's all about, you know, creating more permaculture in your life. But essentially there's a part at the front that really kind of grabbed my attention, and she was talking about habits. And so, like, don't go changing everything all at once. Like, just pick one thing and do it until it becomes habitual and you don't have to think about it and it becomes part of your routine or whatever it is. And then do the next thing, because you're setting yourself up to fail if you want to do all the things all at once, and you know, you end up back at square one or worse. You know, you're so overwhelmed that you are choosing the easy way out because, you know, you've run yourself ragged. So one thing, simple, small solutions, and doing that so that, you know, and over time it will become a big thing. And it can feel really pointless, I guess, in the moment to make that small decision or change. But when you can, you know, look over the last 10 years and go, oh, look at all these little changes I've made and how far I've come, I think that's kind of the benefit of it in the long term, that you do it. Whereas if you try to change everything, you fail, you feel like you're never going to get there, and then in 10 years time you look back and go, oh, well, you know, one day I could have done, and it never happens.
Exactly. And you got to think about the ripple effect as well. Like, it feels small and fairly insignificant when it's just you buying a bar of soap from a neighbour, but if your children or other people you live with, it might be housemates, see you doing that, then they'll see that habit forming within you and be influenced by that. But then also you might have a friend over, they might go to the bathroom and think, oh, this soap's really great, where did you get it? And then you get the opportunity to talk about that with them as well. So it can be something that seems really small, but it can actually have more of an effect than you'll ever realise as well, just keeping that in mind.
I'd love both your opinions. Like, do you really think that if everybody started doing things like shopping local and supporting farmers markets and their local farmers, do you think that the big companies would feel it? Like, do you think we'll actually have an impact? Like, how many people, like, what's that tipping point, I guess, of when it does make a difference on a more grand scale?
There is data on that, and I think it's only about 15% or something.
Wow,
is
really?
the tipping point. It's much less than you'd think. I think it takes a combination of efforts and things like that, but it certainly helps me to feel like I have more control over bigger things. I tend to think about things like this in zones, like we do in permaculture design for landscapes, where you've got your zone 0 is your house, and then, you know, your kitchen garden and so forth. But I think about it as like zones of influence almost. So zone 0 being yourself again, but then zone 1 being your household, the people you live with. Zone 2 being more of your neighborhood and, you know, people who live directly around you. So that would be more of your direct exchanges and trading post kind of situations, skill swaps and things that you can do directly. But then beyond that, you've got and it might depend on where you live. Here, I consider it more of an LGA, like our local government area, but it might just be a suburb if you live in a big city, where you might be participating in local seed libraries or share sheds and community gardens and things that are kind of capturing that larger community. But then beyond that, you've got so like zone 4 would be your state or federal government, where you're lobbying for change and you know, writing letters and influencing policy. And then zone 5 being global, so the influence you can have there, someone who might be creating big global movements and things like that really create change on a bigger scale. And it takes a combination of all of those efforts for change to be effective. So and someone who is traveling around the world making these big movements happen is probably not participating as much in their zone 2 or zone 3, where they're in their local community actually like having a hands-on effect. And so those things are still really important because they need to be done, and we also need people who are going to put pressure on politicians and things like that as well. So it is like it's, I think it's a hard thing to measure, really, but it certainly feels good to do it. And even if it wasn't creating a difference, I enjoy living life this way, living simply and learning traditional skills and things. I think it's kind of fun. It's educational. It just feels really wholesome and the right thing to do anyway.
Yeah, because I feel like that's a big barrier for me, but I think a lot of other people would feel the same way, that it's like, well, why bother, because I'm not going to have an impact, like that kind of mindset. So I love that, thinking about it in zones, because it really kind of puts into perspective that, you know, if you, and I think Hannah Maloney speak to us about this a little bit, Jo, too, like
I think so,
the idea of different levels of activism, and I think that's really interesting. I kind of
well, she's a really good
about that a bit
example
more,
of someone who, like, she's highly intelligent and a great writer, and has that that influence, I guess, with like a big social media following and a YouTube channel, and she can use that to her advantage to create changes in policy and in habits on a, you know, a
mass,
maybe even a global scale. Like, you know, she's I'm not sure how well known she is overseas, but at least across all of Australia, almost everyone that's interested in sustainability or permaculture knows who she is. And so that is something that she can definitely use to her advantage to create that big scale change.
I'm going to say, talking about those zones of influence as well, and thinking about, you know, the people that are being influenced, because we're all influenced to some degree by others, and you've got those people, you know, like Hannah, who are change makers. Like, they are the ones that are driving the change. They're out the front. They're the ones that we all go, wow, isn't that amazing? We all don't have to be that person either. We can be the ones that are just making those small changes. And then you've got people as well who are the ones that, you know, sit back and watch what other people do before they're willing to take action. So they want to see, is there some momentum here before I feel like I want to jump in as well. And so being a part of the person that just makes those little small changes is enough. Like, that is enough as well. If you're someone, though, that is absolutely passionate about change and you want to be out there leading it, like, go for it, because that's, you know, we need more people that are out the front as well to take us along for the ride. But if someone's listening to this and they're going, oh, I don't have the energy for that, like, I'm thinking of myself, like, you know, I'm at the stage of life where I just don't necessarily have the energy and the focus to put into being a huge change maker, but I can do my part. And I'm okay with that.
Well,
you know,
one
so
of the
someone listening,
examples,
yeah,
one of the examples in the new Milkwood book that she gave was, you know, to pick a item in your house. I think she picked toothpaste. And she's like, follow the chain that toothpaste has had to take to get to where you are. And is there a more environmentally friendly or local or whatever, you know, option for that toothpaste? And I think if we did that with a lot of the things that we purchase in terms of that localization lens, to go, okay, well, maybe there's no one here in the Northern Rivers that makes toothpaste that I can buy it off. But like, what's the most local I can go? You know, is it an Australian product, or, you know, am I going to continue just buying Colgate because it's convenient at Woolies? And so just pick a item. Like, it doesn't have to be, like you were saying, overhauling your whole life or whatever. If you can, if you are feeling overwhelmed, to just pick a thing, you know. Can I pick somewhere where my t-shirts can be bought local, or my toothpaste, or my, you know, whatever the thing is.
We find a hard thing's packaging, because even if the toothpaste is made locally, the packaging's probably coming from overseas, and sometimes there's no perfect solution. Like, it can be really especially here in Australia, we don't do much manufacturing. There's a lot of things. I remember having cloth nappies with the kids and people trying to make their own, more the modern cloth nappies, not the traditional ones, where they've got the plastic snap buttons, and there's no manufacturing of those within Australia. So people were trying to do the right thing by buying local materials and making them in their own home, and they were like, but I have to get the snaps from overseas, like why, like so there's certain things that we just don't do here, and those people are doing the best they can, and even though they might be disappointed in not being able to get all the parts that they need locally, they're still making a change that's making a difference. And
especially
it could be though that one person comes across that and says, you know what, I'm going to 3D print some snap buttons because there is a market for this. Like we can melt plastic, I don't know, bread tags down or whatever, and we can make these, and they're the sort of things that bring manufacturing
innovation
back to Australia. Innovation, exactly.
Yeah.
It might be something that has been here before, has now gone offshore, but can be brought back just by one person saying, no, screw this. Like, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to make this happen. And that's starting to happen more and more. Government has a big part in that as well, in the fact that there's so much red tape often and so much cost involved in, not just starting up a business, but manufacturing again in the country. So I think that they have a big part to play in that as well, and that needs to change. But there's lots of innovation that is happening.
We had a conversation with Oscar's dad, because he works for a really big rail corporation that manufacture like wagons and all the train etc. in Newcastle, and he was just saying how much cheaper it is to get them made offshore. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, why don't we just have policies to say that, this has to be shipped here, or it has to be made here, or we have to get it from a certain radius. And then, as my thoughts kept going, I was like, yeah, but like the cost of that, and that's going to come from the taxpayers if we're putting in these levies. And so it's also a fine line, like what are we happy to be made offshore and not be so local? Because we don't want to be the highest cost of living country in the whole world necessarily. And, we're already at the point where a lot of people are at a breaking point. So it's also like, how do you balance that too? Like, how do you make sure that things are affordable, people can live, that it's not crazy expensive to buy things, and we can manufacture in Australia, or certain things are manufactured in Australia? Because when the government makes those policy changes, most of the time it comes out of our pockets. The money's got to come from somewhere. So then how do you balance that want of things to be made here versus things just being so expensive that we couldn't afford to live?
And I think that's another example of where you do what you can, because the problem is the system in that case, where the wrong people are being taxed the wrong amount. It's people without a lot of money to spend are the ones that feel the pinch. But if the tax was a bit fairer, then it'd be someone else paying it, and it wouldn't kind of work out that way. By manufacturing in Australia, they'd be creating more jobs too, which means that, like here, local jobs, which has its own benefits to the local economy. But that in that case is probably something that is more for someone who is at that point of writing and lobbying and creating big policy change, and someone who really feels the pinch of decisions like that is they're more on that scale, where they're doing stuff in their local community and saying, well, taxes are getting high, maybe I start looking at doing exchanges for goods and services instead of earning more money and kind of having to fit into the system that's not working for me.
That's a good point, because like a lot of those rail carts go to mining companies, so like they can then bear the brunt of that cost, not the local everyday person, I guess. So that's a good point. I didn't think about it like that, but I think it's just such a
very
systemic,
complicated.
it's such a big concept thing, and I think that's kind of half the point of having this conversation too. Like that, what can I do? What is practical? What is doable and feasible now, today, tomorrow, this week, rather than getting caught up in the overwhelmingness, I guess, for lack of a better word, of it all. That you're frozen, like you don't do anything, and that inaction has that inaction then has consequences. Like, what can we do that's easy and practical and now to make a difference?
So on the World Localisation Day website, they actually had a suggestion of starting up like a co-op or a bulk buying thing in your own community, but also just thinking about what basic needs your community needs, and can you create a business around that. Again, it's not something that's achievable for everyone, but if there's something that your community is missing and people are constantly complaining that you don't have, is that something you can do or help someone else to do? You might just be of assistance in getting someone else's business off the ground that can fill that need. So I really liked that one, because it kind of fit into that really well, in that we're creating these relationships, and that's kind of what it comes down to, is resilient communities have strong relationships, I think. I have been thinking about community a lot recently. We've had a lot of things here in Paterson that have kind of got people together, and I still feel like sometimes, this goes for everywhere, and it's definitely better here than when I lived in the city as well. Like we've got more of a sense of community here than we've had before. But sometimes I feel like a lot of places have like a false sense of community, where there's people around and they interact with them and they share things in common, but then something goes wrong and they don't have anyone to reach out to, or there might be someone in the community who's suffering and it's going unnoticed because they've disappeared and no one's reached out to say, hey, like, are you all right? I haven't seen you for a few weeks. What's going on? So we're still missing a lot of that social connection, I think. And so when you have something that people connect over that's very busy, and you spend the whole time doing that project, and you don't get the time for just the general chit chat or like meet and greets and things like that, then it's almost like you're getting some sense of community, but it's not everything that you need. I think they're just the points for connection. And a lot of those things we probably lost over lockdowns during COVID, like we mentioned earlier. It wasn't just the fragility of that system, but the fragility of our social systems, where cutting off those ties, those face-to-face meeting opportunities, meant that a lot of people have missed out on lots of different things. I know our eldest started school at that time, and it was really hard to meet other local families. Luckily, we knew some, but it took a little while for us to meet some of his friends' parents, and it turned out it was quite good to be able to rely on each other when you couldn't make pickup, and you just say, oh, can you just take my kid home as well, and I'll come and get them later. And without those points of connection, like it's really hard, because a lot of people aren't living near their immediate families anymore. A lot of us live at least an hour away. I know in Paterson, a lot of people here are tree changers who've moved from bigger cities, and they're not near grandparents and things that can assist with that, or even siblings or anything like that. So just being able to just have those social connections within your community is something that's really important as well. It doesn't feel productive as such, but that's a yield in itself, is just a social connection, I think.
It is. I love that you touched on that, though, that like I think productivity too, like it's an individual thing, isn't it? Like for me, 5 years ago, sitting in the garden with a cup of tea, or in the afternoon with a glass of wine, and talking to the magpies and watching the ducks run around, and that wouldn't have been productive. I would have felt totally guilty for that. And if someone would have arrived, like someone pulled in the driveway, it's almost like I get up and go, oh, I should be doing something, like I should be active in some way. Now that's productive time for me, because that's headspace. And that's really important that I take that time. And I don't care that there's washing to fold, or grass to mow, or whatever activity needs to be done in the garden. Whatever, I'll get there. Just being present is a productive activity for me. So I
find permaculture. I find permaculture really good for justifying that, because I'm observing.
Observation.
I'm just observing.
It's funny you made that point. Point about people and relationships, because we're homeschooling. And there was a mum down the road and she really needed someone to look after her kid. They've got, you know, family in hospital and blah, blah, blah. I was like, yeah, come around and drop her off. And then on her way back, I was like, do you want to stay for a cup of tea? And she was just like, oh, like that wasn't a done thing. Like you just drop a kid off and pick them up. And it's like, but hang on, like, where's our relationship too? Like, I know
That's
our
right.
kids are friends, but
Yeah.
like, you know, she's probably not somebody that I'd be really, really close friends with, but just to have that connection with somebody to know that, you know, if our kids needed something, or like you said, to pick up, you know, or drop off, or I don't know, if one of us broke our leg and we need someone to, you know, get something from Woolies for us, or, you know, simple things like that. To we've kind of been forcing it on our neighbours, and it's funny to see their reactions and how people actually, you know, respond, because there's some people who aren't used to it.
I've got to actually have a conversation with you and engage. Oh my goodness. How hard was that though? Like once we've been removed from it, I found that hard after, you know, lockdown. And the older I get, the less social I'm getting, I think. And, you know, I'm the first to admit it. I have to sometimes make a huge effort to go and be social. Like the self-talk of, I don't want to go to an event or whatever. And then I get there and I'm like, I'm having the best time. Why did I get in my head about it? But it was so hard. It was exhausting. After not doing it, it was a skill that hadn't been practiced, and I had no sort of, I suppose, match fitness when it came to that. So the first time we went out and had a social outing, it was like half an hour, and I'm in the toilet because I was like, oh, I just need to have some like space. It was just too much. And I think a lot of people felt the same. So it's one of those things too, that if you're not someone, you know, if you're quite introverted and you know, your cup is filled by, you know, solitude and having time by yourself, is just making those small connections. Pick one person that you go, hey, I actually think I like them, and just have a 10-minute conversation. Like it doesn't need to be you don't have to throw a party or, you know, go to these huge events. You know, do what you can do with where you are.
I think it's funny that you said that about how you kind of were excited and then had a different kind of feel when you started socializing again. My sister once referred to myself as an extroverted introvert and Will as an introverted extrovert. And I was like, what do you mean? And she said, well, you like sign yourself up to go out to all these things and you get really excited and you're like, yeah, I can't wait for that. And then the day comes and you're like, oh my God, why did I do this? And then you get there and you're like, won't talk to anyone and you feel really nervous and you get all that anxiety. And she said, and Will would happily just say no to almost everything. And then when he gets there, he just thrives. People love him. He like is really good at talking to people, doesn't bother him, doesn't worry afterwards about saying the wrong thing or anything, just really confident in himself. And he just kind of, she said, you're just the opposite. Like if you weren't booking everything in, he wouldn't get that chance to have that really good
That's so good. So perfectly complimentary.
Yeah, I guess so. But yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, I think COVID definitely made that harder, like having all those lockdowns and even just coming out of that afterwards, worrying about how worried people still were, like trying to give people their space if they were like, oh, I'll talk to you but from a distance, or and trying to navigate all of that stuff again, like all from scratch. And it's a really complicated thing, and we are definitely still recovering from that in some ways, socially and in our communities.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, we're coming up on an hour now of chatting. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up, Jo?
No, I think we've gone down several different rabbit holes and explored a lot of, I mean, there's so much that could be spoken about, you know, with what we've touched on in a whole lot of detail, but I think just, you know,
I definitely recommend people get on the World Localisation Day website. There were so many great ideas on there that you can run an event if you are interested in that, or they said even if you have an event that you're running around that time, you can link it and register it on their website. You can use their logos and things like that. But even just on small scale things you can do right through to large scale, they have a page on there that's they call it the action guide, I think, and when you go onto that, they categorize it into different areas like business and community and food and things like that. And then once you click on each of those topics, it gives you a whole range of things that you can action yourself to be a part of it. And again, it's just about that changing habits, I guess, like creating habits that support localization. One thing was that finance was a big thing as well. And it's something that I'm really passionate about because it's something that I think a lot of people either don't think about, or I'm always surprised to find out how many people bank exclusively with big banks. People who are already interested in permaculture and localization and things like that, and they still do that. And I think, well, it's probably not benefiting you, and it's also not benefiting your values. It doesn't seem to fit with that. So they had anything in that sector, from just changing your own personal finances, little bits on divesting and things, right through to opening your own community bank, which I thought was quite interesting, like a really big concept that would be quite difficult to implement. So all sorts of ideas in each of those categories that range right from things that you can do quite easily to things that might make you feel like you're having more of an impact, and things that can really benefit more people, I guess. So definitely check that out and just see what's on there, because there's some things that surprised me, like I said, with the time bank and things that was new to me, or asset mapping was another one that I thought was really interesting, where you get, hopefully with a group of people, because the more people that contribute to it, the better it would be, I think. But you map in your local area
like who has what.
So things that are publicly available, like libraries and things, but also maybe people that that have certain skills that they provide to the community, and things and services, like goods and services and things like that. So getting together and mapping that out, and just kind of seeing what's available to you locally, and especially collaborating over that would be something that I think would be really interesting for a lot of people as well.
I think there'd be a lot of discoveries made that you're like, oh, I had no idea that person offered that service or had that skill, or would be willing to lend their, I don't know, ride on mower, or happy to come over and do a working bee for a few hours, or whatever that is.
I know in Mayfield they had a shed that was a share shed, so they'd have tools in there, and people can go in and hire them out, like a library but for tools, especially in an urban area. You might not need that tool all the time, but you need it for that
or the place to store it.
Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah, it's not always just about the finances, but just where you're going to keep all this equipment.
Yeah, absolutely. Since we're coming up to the end of the episode, and we've asked you this question before because you are a guest that's come back for a second round, but we'd love to, especially in the context of World Localisation Day or localisation in general, what would be the one piece of advice that you would give someone?
So when I talk about zones of influence, it all starts at that zone 0, just like it does when you do a permaculture landscape design. So do the inner work and do things that fill your cup, because you're more beneficial to everyone when you're operating at an optimum level. It's also good for your kids, if you have kids, for them to see you take care of yourself, and that they can see you value yourself and what you do. But really finding that balance between self-care and your purpose in what you're doing as well. There's plenty of times that I've had to say no to something because even though I really wanted to do it to help someone or help a group or something like that, but if you don't, you've only got 100%. So if you're giving to something new, you have to take away from something else. And so just working on yourself and learning to say no sometimes. Brenna Quinlan actually has a really good diagram of it. I might send to you to share if you like, where it's she talks about canaries in it that are like signs that you're getting burnt out. And it really spoke to me, and it was almost like permission to go, like I do need to step back and take some time to celebrate what you've done as well, which was really good. So in doing that, I think there's a lot of anger and frustration at the bigger picture stuff and things not going the way we want them to. And then even when we have an understanding of that, that can translate to other people in our community too. We see them making choices that we don't want them to make, or even doing things that we know they could do better and we're frustrated that they're not interested. It's almost like that you win more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. Like by being abrasive, people are not going to want to do what you do. By approaching them with openness and compassion, knowing that their situation is not going to be exactly the same as yours and you might not see everything that's going on for them, you open that door for communication and that hopefully that want for them to be more like you and do what you're doing and learn from you if you're willing to share that as well. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's a beautiful way.
Yeah, there can be a lot of judgment in areas like this. And I think it comes from, and often when people are judgmental, I think it's even helpful to step back and go, okay, so what's going on for them? Because if they're approaching that with this anger and frustration, like obviously they're having a hard time and maybe they're not, at 100% for themselves, they're giving too much or something unexpected has come up, and checking on them rather than saying, well, they're going to be rude, I'll just ignore them. Or if you've got the capacity to reach out to them instead and kind of use those edges, I guess, those social edges where you might be able to break that barrier and kind of connect with them instead and make changes that way.
No, that's absolutely perfect. Wonderful. Well, I think that's gorgeous advice. And thank you so much, Anthea, for spending time with us today, chatting about localisation and World Localisation Day. So we'll put all the links in the show notes and on socials. And we can find you on Instagram. Is that right? At Maplewood? Yep.
Maplewood Permaculture, yeah.
Fantastic. So we'll pop
Facebook as well. And we have a website as well for anyone who's interested.
Wonderful. We'll pop all those in the show notes. But thanks for listening today. And I'm sure that we'll be chatting to you again, Anthea, very soon.
Yes, I'm sure. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Permaculture podcast. Jump onto our Facebook group to keep the chat going and to look for any resources that we mentioned on today's show. Look in the show notes.
And if you enjoyed today's episode, then please give us a like, a review, and share with your friends. And if you didn't, then that's okay. We're sure you'll find the right podcast for you.